Welcome to this panel on packaging and circularity, the digital future. I'm Marcus Gover from WRAP. WRAP is an international climate action NGO working to protect our planet by changing the way that things are produced, consumed and disposed of. And we're going to talk today about the need for technology to enable the circular economy for product packaging. And when we talk about packaging, though, we mustn't forget what's in the packaging, food and other products. The impact of what is in the packaging usually far outweighs the packaging itself, and we need to keep that in mind. The packaging is there to protect and preserve the product. And with food and products accounting for nearly half of all greenhouse gas emissions, this is a critical space when it comes to keeping 1.5 degrees alive and getting to net zero, a space that is often overlooked. Now, an example is a beefsteak in a plastics packed. And a single steak can have a carbon footprint of around 6 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. But what does that mean? Well, that's the same as driving my car about 60 kilometers. So you can see it's pretty significant. But the pack that's around it is there to protect it and preserve that high carbon product and stop it being wasted. It's a very light pack and it's got a very small carbon footprint measured in grams rather than kilograms. At the same time, though, it's critical that pack is designed to be circular, minimizing it, avoiding toxic chemicals, making it reusable if possible, and always 100% recyclable. Those principles of reduce, reuse, recycle. It's no good if the pack ends up polluting the ocean or causing harm to humans or wildlife. So circularity is a key sustainability issue for sustainable packaging and a sustainable future. And we need to minimize the resources to extract from nature by keeping them in use as long as possible, and then returning them at the beginning of the cycle when they're going to be used in new goods. And that's what we're going to talk about in the panel today. We've got a great panel to help us do that. So first of all, we've got Diane Holdorf, who is the Executive Vice President of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And Diane focuses on the pathways at the World Business Council, leading business efforts to accelerate collaborative solutions in food and agriculture, energy, products, materials, mobility and built environments, as well as health and well-being. So quite a lot. Before joining World Business Council, Diane was Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Kellogg. Before that, she served as a Vice President for Dell Consultants, now called Antea, a global environment, health and safety sustainability consulting firm. In 2022, Diane was selected as one of the 25 leading women shaping the climate action by Greenbiz, so a real leading figure in this space. We then have Shruti George, who's Vice President for Strategic Innovation Platform at Avery Dennison. And after nearly a decade-long international career with McKinsey, Shruti joined Avery Dennison in 2017, where she held a number of global and strategic roles. She currently works at the intersection of innovation and sustainability in material science and digital solutions. And she's driving long-term disruption to achieve a net zero value chain in labels and packaging. And finally, we have Wouter Vermeulen, Senior Director of Sustainability for the Coca-Cola company in Europe. And he leads Coca-Cola's ESG agenda for its Europe operating unit. Now, this includes integrating the sustainability goals across issues such as packaging, water, climate, social impact, and nutrition, as well as engaging with stakeholders to scale up solutions. He joined the Coca-Cola company in 2006 as the Senior Manager for Public Affairs and Communications in Belgium and Luxembourg, and has held roles of increasing responsibility over the years. Most recently, he's been leading the company's Public Policy Centre for Europe, and he represents Coca-Cola at various trade associations, platforms across Europe. So a great panel that we've got today to talk about this issue. And I'm going to start with a question for each, and then we'll move forward and sort of explore the issues a bit further. So if I could turn to you first, Diane. We're talking today specifically about how technology and digitization can enable and support a circular economy in product packaging. What roles does technology play in the World Business Council's view?
Marcus, thanks so much. It's so great to be here with all of you today. You know, digitalization technology are absolutely key to be able to unlock circularity and really take it even to greater scale, particularly in the area of packaging. It can start at design, where technology has a really important role to play on how products are designed, how the packaging is designed for circularity, how you can design into the end of phase of a product life, for example, or really as we think about ease of sorting, recapturing, shipping, and handling of these materials, being able to even identify the types of packaging that are being used so that sorting machines and pickers and others can really optimize how we're disposing, capturing, recycling, and getting to that proper end of life treatment. From a company perspective, however, putting packaging into its supply chain and total value chain, there's a very key aspect to digitalization and technology when it comes to the types of metrics we need to be putting into place, because knowing what to track and how to track it across a product's life cycle and the packaging's life cycle that accompanies it is really critical to being able to get to the right recapture, reuse, and handling of that packaging material. And so thinking about the KPIs and the technology, the digitalization we need around that is really important. And work that we're doing at WBCSD influences this at a couple of different stages. One is around how we measure circularity overall in a company's transition in its use of packaging and the materials that it selects. Those circular transition indicators, or CTI indicators, are a key way of a company quantifiably measuring the volumes, the material selections, and the end-of-life capture components for its portfolio assessments. That's a really key aspect of this. Particularly when we think about packaging specifically, the Sphere quantitative assessment technology is a critical way of tracking that and reporting against that. Companies have to be able to more consistently track, capture, and report on the materials, the volumes, and the ways the end of life of packaging uses are being handled, so that we can see what's the trajectory of performance that is improving or not, where are the biggest challenges that we need to bring technology to bear to create further unlocks. All of that kind of tracing, tracking, reporting is very important when it comes to the enabling policy environment. And Marcus, as we've been discussing, there's a lot of shifts within this. We've got Europe coming forward with its new digital product passport policy that needs to be implementable at a national level across some very consistent sectors and materials. We've got to be able to do that with credibility and consistency. So the digitalization for tracking and management is key, back to the points I was just making. But equally, we've got the UN driving the global treaty on plastics waste, and that's going to be focused particularly on single-use plastics and plastic packaging. If we need to get a handle on how much we're putting out there, how we're reducing it, what's getting captured, how it's being reused, and data and technology have really key roles to play in helping us respond to these types of changing policy environments.
Oh, thank you, Diane. That's a really thorough answer and sets us up well for our discussion as we go on. Shruti, if I could turn to you, I mean, labels are a key part of packaging. So what role do they play in enabling circularity?
Thanks, Marcus. And for people who don't know Avery Dennison, we are probably one of these secret Fortune 500s that is basically the world leader in labels, as well as UHF RFID. So this is actually in our ballpark, so as to speak. So basically, there are 4 things I would say that are really interesting for us from a technology standpoint. Number one, given how ubiquitous labels are, we basically ensure that our own labels are adhering to the lowest possible footprint we can get to, right? So the aim is to kind of get to carbon zero, net zero, but just as well make sure that we're not kind of creating non-circular products at the end of the day. So this is basically the first goal that we want to get to. There are obviously things that we need to do to get to the final pathway. It's not a single straight line, as you might imagine. The second thing for us is really around the recyclability, and that really comes into the circularity discussion, right? So for us, talking about recycling and recycling systems, labels should never be an impedance to the to recycling as a whole. What that means is, given the current specificity that we have, we should not impede a plastic bottle in the recycling process, in the sorting process, And that's kind of the way that we work through the whole design process. So what Diane said, given how important packaging design is across all kinds of packaging type, be it glass bottles and plastic, all the way to corrugated boxes of that you get with your Amazon package, right? Everything needs to be recyclable as a whole, and that's something that we actually spend time and effort kind of designing towards. The third thing, and I think this is the most interesting piece for me, is really around the data transparency side. Again, given that we are the world's biggest UHF RFID producer, we kind of see this transparency in the supply chain, the DPP, as really integral to us kind of providing the supply chain the transparency it needs, both in the forward as well as in the reverse logistics standpoint. What that really means is we find use cases all over, right? We find use cases to figure out how we inform consumers about how to recycle better. But just as well, reuse and and refillable products, for instance, right? So how do you enable, for example, secondary packaging that is completely reusable? And the last thing is that we need to actually talk with our money, right? And walk with our money. More and more, we only invest in small companies, in bigger companies, M&A, VC, all of that. We make sure that we're investing in companies that actually make sustainable impact to the current environment, and that's actually part of the way that we're thinking about investments on the whole. So we've invested in a company called Roadrunner in North America, which really does recycling. But just as well, we've been looking at a whole accelerator process program, where out of the 9 companies that we selected in the first cohort, 5 of them are really centered around recycling, around circularity and sustainability. So those are the pieces that we're doing. It's all kind of adding up, and I'm really excited about the future of this space.
Thank you for that. So the role of labels, you said, a major label company, which is really, really critical for this. If I could come to Arta, why is the circular economy in packaging so important for the Coca-Cola company, and how do you see digital technology as an enabler of circularity?
Sure. Thanks, Marcus. And thanks for the invite and the opportunity to join and share a few thoughts. I think, the starting point is if we want to meet the SDG 2030 goals, if we want to meet what we have agreed in the Paris Climate Agreement, we need to transform our food systems, the way in which we produce, consume, distribute food and beverages. And your reference to the climate impacts of the food supply chain which are important here in Europe. 1/3 of climate impacts are related to food systems. For the Coca-Cola company globally, 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions are linked to packaging. So, if we want to drive a low carbon, resource efficient, circular economy, our company needs to take action on packaging, right? So that's where we're coming from, that clear link between climate and packaging. So action on packaging means for us 3 key things. First of all, we call it the design pillar. Actually, we want to bring as little packaging to the market as possible, right? And so we're doing a host of things there, but let me reference one example is earlier this year, we came out with an industry leading commitment that by 2030, 25% of our global beverage volume would come in refillable or reusable packaging, bottles or cups. So that helps us actually to decrease our packaging footprint. We ensure our packaging is recyclable. We ensure we use more recycled materials. So design is a very important pillar. Second important pillar is obviously collection, right? We want to keep packaging within the circular economy, avoid they get lost because they're valuable resources. So we have a global goal to collect a can and a bottle by 2030 for every one we bring to the market. Design, collect, and then the third pillar is partnerships. I think, driving a circular economy requires systemic change, requires us to look outside the walls of our own company and organizations to get new ideas, to get new insights. And that's why, obviously, we work with partners to set up packaging recovery organizations. We support the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We support RAP UK's Plastic Pact. We are signed up to the Business Coalition in support of the UN Treaty. So I think partnerships are very important as well. And then to understand, like, where does digital play a role? Well, and we can debate further, but digital obviously is not a goal in of itself. It's a means to an end, and we believe it is very important to first have a good understanding of the bottlenecks. Right? Do we have a bottleneck in terms of sorting capability, or in collection, or in consumer behavior, or in the design of packaging? And then to think through how digital solutions and digital tools can help overcome those bottlenecks and can help and drive the scale that we need, to accelerate our transition to a circular economy. So, as always, it's not a silver bullet. It's not a one size fits all. It needs to come from a very good understanding of what is the problem that we try to solve. And let's not forget that obviously that digital has its own environmental challenges, right? I think we also need to be eyes wide open there. And as we are discussing on how the circular economy can become more digital, maybe we also need to reflect on how the digital economy can become more circular. So I leave it to that, and happy to pick up the conversation further.
No, thank you very much. So we've heard a bit about metrics, we've heard about labels, we've heard about understanding the flows and the bottlenecks, trying to create this circular economy and to get the benefits that we want from it. In the UK, we're seeing reforms at the moment, waste policy reforms and revamps of collection systems, bringing in extended producer responsibility and deposit return systems, seeking to get these benefits. And UK governments have set out as essential to bring about the circular economy to do that. A lot of experience you've got from different parts of the world. What's your advice, and how do you see that technology and digitization could support and enable these changes that the UK government is trying to bring into the UK at the moment?
Well, we support well-designed deposit return schemes, right? We do think they are very efficient. They will help us get to the mandatory legal requirements across Europe, 90% separate collection by 2029, our own world without waste commitment, 100% collection. I think here again, the importance is to understand, what we try to achieve. We try to achieve bottle-to-bottle collection, separate collection. So, those systems work quite well already today. So I would argue that, the rollout of DRS schemes across Europe is maybe not a matter of digital. It's a matter of fostering partnerships across the industry, and indeed, engaging with governments to ensure that we work in hand. And there's an enabling policy framework. In other geographies, like for instance in Ecuador, in Nigeria, we work with digital solutions, apps, and incentivization schemes to actually, promote collection. In South Africa, we have a blockchain platform that I can talk about in more detail if needed, that actually connects waste pickers with the aggregators and the buyback schemes. So again, it all starts with like, what's the problem to solve? What is holding us back of rolling out DRS schemes? And where does the intervention of adding digital to the mix adds the most value? So definitely digital has a role there, but it needs to be thought through carefully.
So think through carefully is your advice. Shruti, did you want to add to that?
Yes. So I think there's, as Walter said, there's this big push, especially in Europe, around reusable packaging. How do you kind of enable that? So part of that is actually the deposit return scheme, but actually it's good business, right? So part of actually figuring out how to digitize this whole process, especially around reusable packaging, is actually improving your return rates. We did some analysis around this, and this was based in China. So for every 1% increase in return rates on crates, pallets, you could swing margins by around 2% for the companies that were actually producing the reusable packaging. And this is actually true across the board, right? So for me, part of actually enabling digital and digitization of this whole value chain is making sure that the companies actually feel empowered to do this because it's actually making them money, rather than seeing this as an encumbrance. And that's kind of where you get to when you can really create this use case around how does digital enable better reuse models, and kind of enable everything not to go into the trash immediately.
Yeah. It's great that you raise reuse and refill there, because really recycling is the last thing the circular economy is about. And if we can drive more reuse and refill, that's where we'll get the biggest wins, especially for the planet. But how could technology further support and drive that? I mean, Diane, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, Marcus, we've been talking a lot about digitalization as a key technology enabler, and there's no question it is, particularly when we're talking about the reverse logistics, the capture and the proper handling of materials. And that's a really key aspect of what the UK is considering here and what every country and municipality, frankly, is challenged with when it comes to that end of life piece. But there's a huge role for technology when it comes to material design. And I think leaning into the use of new technologies and scaling the types of technologies that will be more able to be circular at the end of life before needing to be recaptured and recycled is going to be a key way that we're going to bring solutions forward. So it's not just around disassembly at the end of life and the products, but the actual materials we're using for the packaging. How are we getting to more plant-based packaging? How are we moving into the types of packaging and labeling where we don't need to separate them? They can go into their end of life scenario still together so that we're not dealing with separation challenges. These are all really big areas where technology has a role to play, and we're seeing solutions come in. I think, interestingly, we could see some real pressure coming into this, particularly on the plastics side, as we look at the energy crisis challenges that we're dealing with, particularly that Europe is dealing with, because that's going to put a lot of pressure into the types of petroleum-based plastics materials that are commonly found in packaging, that we can use that as a technology accelerator into some of these other types of solutions that are available. So that's another area where we want to drive technology to create better solutions for us.
That's great.
So maybe, Marcus, if I can add one build to what Diane was saying, and to your point on how do we promote the uptake of refill and reuse, which is, actually something we as Coca-Cola company definitely want to do, is that we have to acknowledge that we still can learn more about the consumer behavior and how to instill consumer habits. So I think digital here plays also a role, because, refill, reuse, be it at home, be it on the go. And, at the end of the day, as a consumer-centric business, we know that, consumer education, getting the consumer on board is going to be key to help us unlock this. And, we have a few pilots currently running, like with Costa Coffee, that is trialing a blockchain-enabled pilot in Glasgow to actually better understand the consumer behavior, the consumer journey, so that we can adapt our models, to be close to the consumer, which then in turn, again, will help the uptake of these necessary solutions to reduce the environmental footprint of our packaging.
Thank you. I mean, the other place where there is benefit in terms of towards net zero is use of recycled content, saving the use of virgin packaging materials. How do you think we can sort of promote that further? I mean, one of the challenges is measuring recycled content. Do you have anybody have any thoughts on ways to improve that?
I'll just jump back in quickly, Marcus, and then hand it back off to the others here with us. We spoke at the beginning around how important metrics are and KPIs are to driving the right kinds of reporting and performance. This is especially true when we talk about recycled content. We need to be able to understand the percentage of recycled content that we're using. There's a lot of commitments driven really helpfully by the leadership of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation around increasing the recyclable content in packaging materials. The ability for companies to consistently and credibly report on what percentage of their material is recycled content today is key. And that's where, WBCSD often picks up is translation into operationalization, how we are able to bring these things to life and scale them across companies and supply chains. So getting to the right level of data and reporting and getting that reporting out there for accountability and transparency is key, but then enabling the types of material scalability, like we were talking about scaling these technology solutions, has to come quickly behind that so that we're increasing the ability to incorporate recycled content into it. And frankly, moving away from the need for us to have so much recycled content in our material overall. So just a couple of key thoughts around how we use metrics and technology to drive an increase in what it is that we need to see as these outcomes.
I'll pick
Thank
a
you.
bit on this. Sorry. Um, I'll pick a bit on this from an availability standpoint, and this kind of goes back to what Diane and Walter were talking about, which is there's only so much recycled content in the industry right now, and that's because there is only so much going through the value chain, right? When we're talking about recycling, we're actually talking mostly about downcycling, not actually closed loop recycling, and that is a massive and a large amount of that is actually due to the fact that it's not being collected, and that's where Walter was talking about, how do you enable proper collection systems for different regions, which are actually then fit for purpose and not one size fits all, right? And that really has a regional cultural component to it. But just as well, once it gets into the system, how do you sort effectively, and how do you make sure that all the streams are in the right place where you can get, for example, food grade recycling that is really clean and then actually can go back to food grade rather than get into like a slipper that someone's wearing. And there are actually two aspects to it. I think the first aspect is around just making sure that the technology and is there from both a physical and a chemical perspective, because that's what it is fundamentally. And then the second piece for me is around the transparency aspect. And that transparency really can be enabled either by digital means or just by having, for example, I live in the Netherlands, we've now started having a deposit return scheme for PET bottles. So there's something on the label itself that says that this can actually be sorted through and then you get money back. So these can be really dumb solutions as well, but you really need to be putting it across as both businesses as well as countries to kind of make it work.
I'm gonna draw us to a close towards the end of this point because our time is running through very, very, very quickly, actually. So fascinating talking about these things. But we've been talking about how to create the circular economy for packaging and talking about the benefits of it and its role really in towards getting to net zero. That's often overlooked. A recent report that my organisation, RAP, produced showing how the G7 could save 1 billion tonnes per year of carbon dioxide equivalent, 1 billion tonnes through circular economy actions. And increasing recycling of materials and reuse of materials like packaging are some of those key actions. At the moment, the circular economy just isn't getting that recognition, it seems to me. We're all doing things and helping towards net zero, but the world is focused on renewable energy and electric vehicles, but the role we're playing delivers results immediately. And I would like to see sort of a bit more recognition of that, a bit more support for the role that you and us and others are playing in achieving that circular economy. You're key partners to RAP. We work with all of you in different parts of the world. So we're all in this together. But do you have a final comment for any of you in that space? More recognition for what we're all doing. Perhaps I just read through each of you. Walter, you first. Short comment.
Well, recognition obviously comes through action. So I think as companies, we need to demonstrate progress on our ambitions. I am hopeful that, with the UN Global Plastics Treaty that is now underway, with the business coalition that came out with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and WWF taking the lead here, that, as we work towards COP27, this will be pushed higher up on the agenda, because indeed we need enabling policy frameworks, including preferential access to RPET, what Shruti was referencing to before. So I'm mildly hopeful.
Thank you. I mean, we're supporters of the Business Coalition and the treaty as well, and we look forward to that. Shruti, what about you? A final sort of comment for you on how much we're all doing towards net zero and how that could be scaled by and seen by others better.
I think we touched upon it a bit before. I think cooperation, not competition, and really creating partnerships across every single value pool, because there's no way that one company can decide that they want to do something and do it. So that would be my answer.
Yeah, thank you. And Diane?
There's no question, Marcus, that collective action is how we're going to get there, and circularity is a key driver of helping achieve net zero commitments that so many companies have made and therefore helped deliver the climate agreement from Paris even. This aspect around the role of packaging and plastics is, as you said, often overlooked. It's not recognized as one of the key drivers. It's not, for example, how we unlock the sustainable energy space through circularity. However, if we don't get a handle on plastics and we don't get our packaging into a circular model, we will not be able to deliver on the climate urgency and the net zero action that's needed. So we fully support this, and it's kind of embedded in how we lead and work with partners on this collective action.
Right, thank you very much. So wise words from our panel there about the role that we can all play towards net zero and the critical role of partnership. None of us can do this by ourselves. Thank you very much to the whole panel. It's been great talking to you for a very fast 30 minutes, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.